Beyond the Gates spoilers tease that Leslie's unraveling began with something as simple and yet as devastating as a single letter. No return address. No name. No flourish of handwriting she could immediately recognize. Just her name, Leslie, scrawled on the front in uneven strokes, like the pen had been pressed too hard, the pressure breaking the fibers of the paper. It had been waiting for her in the narrow mailbox downstairs, the one that always screeched when opened. For most people, a letter meant a bill, a flyer, maybe a neighbor's misplaced holiday card. But this one felt different the moment she touched it. Heavier than a note should be. She could smell something faint, like old cigarettes and lavender oil, the combination clinging to the paper like a memory she didn't want. She opened it at her kitchen table, the afternoon light slicing through the blinds in perfect lines across her coffee mug. At first, she read quickly, scanning for familiarity, for a hint at who had sent it. But the words came at her like accusations, each sentence dragging her deeper into a panic she couldn't explain. They weren't threats exactly, nothing she could take to the police, but they were personal, specific, the kind of details only someone from her past could know. Whoever had written it knew about Eva. They knew about the night she left. They knew she hadn't told the whole truth to anyone. By the time she finished, her pulse was high and her breathing shallow. She folded the letter back into its envelope, but that didn't stop the words from echoing. That night, she barely slept, the paper sitting on her nightstand like an unblinking eye. Days later, the letter's shadow still lingered. She found herself checking over her shoulder when she walked down the block, studying faces in the crowd as if one might light up with recognition. The mail slot rattled every afternoon at 3, and every time she froze, convinced another envelope was sliding through. That was why, when the knock came at the door one late morning, she wasn't ready. Through the peephole, she saw a woman in her 50s, hair piled high in a style that spoke of another decade, lipstick a touch too bright. The expression on her face wasn't one of uncertainty or caution. It was ownership. Leslie opened the door only enough to speak, her voice controlled, a polite "Can I help you?" on her lips. The woman didn't wait for an invitation. She stepped forward, her perfume preceding her in a thick cloud, her heels clicking on the hardwood as if she'd walked here 100 times. "Lovely place you've got here," she said, her eyes sweeping over the apartment with an appreciative glance that held something sharper underneath. "Very comfortable. You must be doing quite well for yourself." It was Peaches. Leslie's joy tightened. Of course it was Peaches. She had imagined this moment before, though in her imaginings she had the strength to slam the door, to tell her to leave. In reality, Peaches was already inside, inspecting the bookshelves, running a finger along the countertop, glancing at framed photos with an expression that flickered between interest and mockery. Her tone shifted quickly from admiration to accusation. "So this is why you left without saying goodbye," she said, turning back to Leslie with a smirk. "Didn't want anyone to know how well you'd landed." Leslie felt something coil in her stomach. Around Nicole, she could stand her ground, let her sharp edges show. But Peaches wasn't like Nicole. Peaches was different. Peaches knew things that could unravel everything if she chose to. There was no small talk, no preamble. Peaches got to her point like a knife finding its mark. "I'll be staying here for a while," she announced, as though Leslie's apartment were a hotel and Leslie the reluctant concierge. Leslie's shock was visible. That's not possible," she started, but Peaches talked right over her. "And how's little Eva?" Peaches asked casually, watching Leslie closely, like a cat watching a trapped bird. The change in Leslie's expression was immediate, her color draining just enough for Peaches to notice. She leaned in, her voice dropping to something more intimate, more dangerous. "You didn't tell her about me, did you? You didn't tell her who I am." Leslie's denial was quick, but her eyes betrayed her. She could feel the walls closing in, because the truth was Eva didn't know about Peaches. She didn't know Peaches existed. The moment tightened like a rope around Leslie's neck when the front door opened again. Eva's voice came from the hallway, bright and curious. She stopped short when she saw Peaches, her brow furrowing. "Who's this?" she asked, looking from the stranger to Leslie. Leslie opened her mouth, searching for a way to soften the truth, to control the reveal. But Peaches didn't hesitate. "Hello, sweetheart," she said warmly. "Of course you don't know me. Your mother took you away before you were even born." The words landed like a slap. Eva turned to Leslie, confusion mixing with hurt in her eyes. She was looking for contradiction, for a simple, "That's not true." But Leslie hesitated just long enough for the damage to take root. Later, Eva found Leslie in her room. Her voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath. Was she telling the truth? Leslie deflected, sidestepping with half-answers that only made Eva more certain. She could feel the shift in her daughter's trust, the way it pulled back just slightly, like a tide retreating before a storm. Now Leslie was in a corner. If Peaches stayed, the secret she had worked so hard to protect would spill into the open. And Peaches didn't just want a bed to sleep in, she wanted something else entirely. It wasn't long before that something revealed itself. Peaches had a weakness, a habit that had driven her to more than one doorstep in her life. Gambling. It was in the way she talked about lucky streaks and one more hand. It was in the late-night phone calls, the sudden disappearances. And now she was looking to Leslie to fund her next round at the tables. Leslie gave her money at first. Enough to keep her occupied, to keep her quiet. But Peaches' appetite for risk was bottomless. What she wanted was a stream, not a drop. Out of options, Leslie reached out to Ted. She didn't want to, but she knew Ted had the means and he had his own motivations. She told him the money was for peace, for keeping certain people away from Kat and Nicole. Ted didn't need to know all the details. He agreed quickly, maybe too quickly. Leslie suspected he saw this as an opportunity to circle back to Nicole, to use the favor as leverage. It made her skin crawl, but desperation had narrowed her choices to a single path. And still, the question hung over her, what would Peaches do if the money stopped? How long could Leslie keep her spinning in place before the truth found its way into the open? The days ahead promised nothing but strain. Peaches was settled in now, her presence in the apartment like a shadow that never moved. Eva was quieter, watchful. And Leslie knew that one wrong move could bring it all crashing down. Peaches didn't leave. She didn't even make it seem like she might. Instead, she behaved as though she'd been there all along, claiming the corner chair in the living room as if it had always been hers, leaving her shoes in the hallway, and stacking her coffee cups in a precarious tower in the sink. Every morning, Leslie woke to the sound of her voice loud, unfiltered, already in mid-story with someone on the phone. The stories were always the same. Someone owed her money, someone had cheated her in a card game, someone had given her a look she didn't appreciate. Eva kept her distance, moving around the apartment with a watchful quietness that made Leslie uneasy. Whenever she and Peaches crossed paths, Eva's eyes would linger on her just a beat too long, like she was trying to connect dots Leslie had worked years to keep apart. Leslie tried to keep the peace by giving Peaches what she wanted: money, errands run for her, a kind of polite tolerance that felt like swallowing glass. But even as she handed over folded bills, Leslie could see the hunger in Peaches' gaze. This wasn't going to be enough. And then came the slip. One evening, while Leslie was in the kitchen, she overheard Peaches on the phone again. The conversation was muffled, but certain words were clear enough. "Eva doesn't know, worth something." It wasn't the tone of a family member talking about a niece. It was the tone of someone considering leverage, someone plotting how to use what they knew. That night, Leslie lay awake, the dark ceiling above her seeming closer than it had before. She was running out of time. The next morning, she met Ted in a cafe 3 blocks from the apartment. He looked pleased to see her, almost smug. He slid into the seat opposite her with a coffee he hadn't bought for her. "How's our little arrangement working out?" he asked, but his eyes were scanning her face for something more. She told him Peaches needed more money. She didn't explain that this was no longer about keeping her out of trouble, it was about keeping her from opening her mouth to Eva. Ted leaned back, smiling faintly. "You know, Leslie, there's only so much cash I'm willing to hand over without returns." The implication hung in the air, sour and heavy. Leslie hated him for it, but she also knew Ted wasn't bluffing. If she refused, he could easily turn his attention to Nicole in ways Leslie didn't want. Back at the apartment, Peaches was in high spirits. She'd just won big, which in her language usually meant she'd clawed back enough to feel unstoppable again. But her wins never lasted. By the next day, she was pacing the apartment, muttering about bad luck and rigged games. Eva approached Leslie in the evening, her voice low. "I know you don't want to talk about her, but she said some things." Leslie braced herself. Eva's gaze was sharp now, unsoftened by uncertainty. "She told me you kept me from her because you didn't trust her. That you thought she'd ruin me." The silence that followed was long enough to make Eva sigh. "Is that true?" Leslie didn't answer. She couldn't not without unraveling the rest. Eva shook her head and walked away, the sound of her bedroom door closing feeling louder than it should have. 2 days later, the situation cracked. Peaches confronted Leslie in the living room, holding one of the photographs from the bookshelf. It was of Eva, about 8 years old, grinning at the beach. Peaches tapped the glass with a fingernail. "Pretty thing. She should know where she comes from. She should know about me." Leslie's voice was sharper than she intended. "Stay out of it." Peaches' laugh made a low, humorless sound. "You think you can keep this up forever? You think Ted's going to keep bailing you out?" The mention of Ted made Leslie's skin crawl. "What do you want?" she asked finally, the exhaustion clear in her voice. Peaches' answer was simple, enough to start over. For real this time. But Leslie had heard that promise before. Starting over was just another way of saying she'd burn through the money and be back at the door in 6 months. That night, Leslie made a decision. She didn't know if it was the right one, only that it was the only one left. She began pulling together everything she had in cash, moving it into a small envelope she kept in her dresser. It wouldn't fix Peaches. It wouldn't even fix the situation. But maybe it would buy her the time she needed to figure out the rest. The following morning, before Eva woke, Leslie placed the envelope on the kitchen table. Peaches was already there, shuffling a deck of cards absently. Her eyes flicked to the envelope, then back to Leslie. "What's this?" "Your chance," Leslie said quietly. Peaches smiled, slow and knowing. "You're learning." For a moment, Leslie thought it might be over, that Peaches would take the money and go. But as she reached for the envelope, she paused, her fingers resting on it like she was testing its weight. "You know," she said, "money's not the only thing people pay with." The words hung between them like a trap waiting to spring. In the days that followed, Leslie moved carefully. Peaches seemed distracted, taking more phone calls, disappearing for hours. But the tension never fully left. Every time Eva came home, Leslie felt the urge to pull her close, to keep her from speaking to Peaches at all. Ted called once, checking in. His tone suggested he thought things were under control, but Leslie could hear the curiosity underneath, the way he wanted to know more than she was willing to tell. The breaking point came one late evening when Eva returned unexpectedly early. Leslie was in her bedroom, and by the time she came into the living room, Eva was sitting with Peaches, a mug of tea in her hands. They were talking quietly, but when they saw Leslie, the conversation stopped. Eva stood, her face unreadable. "We were just catching up." Leslie's heart thudded. She looked at Peaches, who only smiled, the kind of smile that said she'd just laid the groundwork for something Leslie wouldn't be able to undo. That night, Leslie couldn't sleep. She replayed every choice she'd made since the letter arrived, wondering if there had been a point where she could have stopped this. She knew one thing for certain: Peaches wasn't going anywhere until she got exactly what she wanted her, until Leslie found a way to make her leave. And now, the clock was ticking faster than ever. Leslie had been circling the inevitable for days, knowing that every conversation, every glance between Eva and Peaches was moving her closer to the point of no return. The apartment felt smaller now, the air heavier, as though the walls themselves were leaning in to listen. She could no longer tell if she was trying to protect Eva from Peaches or from the truth itself. On a Thursday evening, rain streaking the windows in long silver lines, the confrontation came without warning. Eva emerged from her room, her phone in her hand, her voice sharper than Leslie had ever heard it. "I called someone today," she said flatly. "I wanted to know if what she's been saying is true." Leslie froze. "Who did you call?" Peaches appeared from the kitchen doorway like she'd been waiting for her cue. "Me, of course," she said smoothly, slipping into the room. "I gave her the pieces, she just needed to put them together." Eva's gaze shifted between them, and Leslie could see the judgment forming in her daughter's eyes. She felt the fragile thread of trust straining. "Eva," Leslie began, but Peaches stepped closer, cutting her off. "You should have told her, Leslie. Hiding me doesn't erase me. It just makes you look like a liar." The words struck like blows. Leslie's chest tightened, but she could feel her anger building, bubbling past the fear. "You came here for money," she shot back. "Don't pretend this is about family. You've never cared about anyone but yourself." Peaches's smile faltered for the first time. "You think you know me?" she said, her voice low. "You think you're better because you ran? Because you built yourself a neat little life and locked the door behind you." The rain outside picked up, the sound filling the silence that followed. Eva was motionless, her eyes wide, caught between them. Leslie realized this was her moment, her last chance to take control. "Eva," she said, her voice steady, "the reason I kept you from her wasn't because I didn't trust you. It's because I didn't trust her. I knew she'd find a way to use you, just like she's used everyone else. And now you've seen it for yourself." Peaches laughed, but it was brittle, without the confidence she usually wore. "You think she's going to believe that after all this time?" Eva's eyes didn't leave Leslie's. "I think I already do," she said quietly. It was the smallest shift, but Leslie felt it like a lifeline thrown in the dark. Peaches's expression tightened, her bravado cracking just enough for Leslie to see the exhaustion underneath. Leslie stepped forward, closing the space between them. "You're leaving. Tonight. You take what I gave you and you don't come back. If you do, I won't protect you from Ted, from anyone. And you know I can make that call." For a long moment, Peaches didn't move. Then, with a slow shake of her head, she reached for her coat draped over the chair. "You always did know how to cut deep," she murmured. She didn't say goodbye to Eva. She didn't slam the door. She just left, the sound of her heels fading down the hallway until there was nothing but the hum of the rain. Leslie stood there, her pulse still pounding, waiting for the knock that didn't come. When she finally turned to Eva, there was no accusation in her daughter's face, only a tired sort of relief. They didn't speak much that night. Words could come later. For now, the quiet was enough. In the days that followed, Leslie remained cautious. She knew Peaches wasn't the kind to disappear forever, that her absence might only be a pause before the next storm. But for now, the door was closed. And for the first time in weeks, Leslie felt like she could breathe.